Hey guys, my name is Matumio, and every so often, I like to switch things up in Battlefield 4 by joining a hardcore server and turning off my UI. I call it my ultra-realistic hardcore challenge. I don't really call it anything. But what I do know is that this is easily one of the coolest ways to play Battlefield, and honestly, one of the best ways to experience this game. The one thing that I love about it is the sense of realism that it captures that you don't ever really experience in any of the other game modes. I know how silly that might sound to you because Battlefield is not known for its hyper-realism, but because I can't rely on my UI, I can't lean on that anymore, I have to use the audio and visual cues that DICE has made readily available. Every time I squeeze the trigger, or about to, I have to make that split-second decision if it's an enemy or a teammate. If I hesitate for half a second because I'm not sure if it's an enemy, and I basically wait for them to look at me and then let them shoot first, I'm giving them an advantage. I'm basically handing them the rights to shoot first, and of course that's probably going to result that I'm going to be back at the spawn screen just a second later. DICE, to their credit, does an amazing job at distinguishing between all of the factions and the classes. The Russian engineer looks different from the US variant of it, but if an enemy is 50 meters away, or they're behind some barriers or some objects and all I can see is their dome piece, it's a little difficult to distinguish between all of the classes and to know if that is a friendly or a foe. The result of this, of course, was that I was constantly freaking out. I was always on edge because it didn't matter if it was an enemy or a teammate that rounded the bend. I always had to make that split-second decision because if I did decide to fire on someone and it was a teammate, they of course would die. But if I didn't fire and I hesitated, then I was probably gonna die a half a second later. It was glorious. That is the realism that I loved about doing this challenge, or whatever the hell you want to call it. Surprisingly, one thing that I was definitely not expecting is that at the end of these rounds, when I turned off my UI, or when I turned it back on to figure out how well I did, I was like almost always at the top of the scoreboard. Maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I was going against some players that weren't all that great. Maybe the enemy team wasn't the best marksmen or anything like that. But even still, the fact that I was at the top of the scoreboard indicated to me that whatever I was doing was working. And I think what contributed to it was that I was heavily invested into what was going on. I was really into these matches. Like, all of my senses were tingling. I was constantly trying to figure out the audio cues. If I heard footsteps, I would always try to figure out where those footsteps were coming from. If I heard a Russian soldier scream out, well, I knew I was playing as the US and I was going to use that information to my advantage. And while I do use that information normally when I'm playing Battlefield, because you can't rely on your UI, you notice things a hell of a lot more when it's turned off. Every single sound, every bullet that zips by, when I see a teammate firing off in the distance, I'm like, okay, there's probably some enemies out there. I use that information to my advantage. And I guess the result of all of this, the fact that I was always on edge, I was heavily invested into what was going on, I was using these audio and visual cues, it accumulated to the point where I was successful enough to reach the top of the scoreboard. Once again, maybe it was just because I was lucky. I was going against players that weren't all that great, but the fact that it's possible to reach the top of the scoreboard with having this huge disadvantage is really cool in my mind. It was very rewarding, and honestly, it solidifies my viewpoint that if this was a game mode, I would devour it. Like, I would play it constantly because it really is satisfying. One thing that I did notice though, and this may sound a little strange, is that I preferred to fight against the Chinese army. The US and the Russia, while their avatars do look different, they don't look all that different. The Russians have a green tinge to their uniform, the US is more of a beige or a deserty feel to it, but the Chinese is like a black jumpsuit. They look incredible, don't get me wrong, I love the way that they look, but their character models are much more distinctive compared to the other two. When I was playing as the US going against the Russia, I had numerous occasions where I was hesitating because I just could not figure out if that was an enemy assault or not. Going against China, on the other hand, though, easy. Like, black jumpsuit, all right, I know that's an enemy. Or if I was playing as the Chinese faction, if I don't see anyone that has black anywhere, I'm good to go and I can shoot at them. So I noticed that I was gravitating more towards servers that had the Chinese faction simply because it was a hell of a lot easier to figure out who was friendly or foe. I thought that that was a little bit humorous. But probably the best aspect about this entire process is how gorgeous Battlefield looks when you turn it off. I don't know why this happens. It's not like when I turn off the UI, I'm flipping a switch that all of a sudden increases the graphic fidelity or anything like that. The only change is that there's no minimap and there's no, points popping up on my screen. I don't know why this occurs. Like, hopefully you guys have noticed throughout today's video that at 60 frames per second and no UI on, the game looks incredible. DICE really has done a phenomenal job with the Frostbite engine and the graphics. The fidelity is top notch, and when I was playing, it was just great immersive experience because there really isn't any other video game out there that has these types of graphics in a multiplayer setting like this. It added so much to my gameplay. But if all this is sounding intriguing and you would like to give it a whirl yourself, at least on PC, the way I was getting away with it is that there is a command that I can put in. I'll leave that command down below, and so if you'd like to copy and paste that into your Battlefield 4, you can do that. But on consoles, I think it's a little bit more tricky. I don't think that you can put in console commands on the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4. You can let me know if I'm wrong, but on those systems, I think the way that you can get around it is by setting the transparency of all of like the icons, your friendly icons, the enemy icons, set that all to 0, and I think it should pretty much do exactly what I'm doing in today's video. I could be wrong. I don't own Battlefield 4 on an Xbox or the PlayStation 4, so you guys can let me know. But I think if you want to do this on one of those systems, that's the way to work around it. But yeah, guys, that is about it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed the cinematic gameplay. I clearly adore it. I think it is one of the best ways to play this game. But until tomorrow, have a good one and take it easy.